the choice that followed them forever. The decision was made in minutes, but its shadow stretched far beyond the moment it was taken. Long after the briefing ended and the room emptied, the choice remained quiet, permanent, impossible to reverse. Some decisions fade as circumstances change. This one didn't. It settled into the fabric of the presidency, shaping how every future action would be interpreted. Allies remembered it, critics referenced it, and inside the White House, it became the silent context behind every subsequent choice. What made this moment different was not the pressure. It was the finality. The administration understood immediately that this was not a decision that could be balanced out later. There would be no offsetting success, no future win large enough to erase it. Whatever followed would be measured against this single moment. The circumstances leading up to the choice were complex, layered, and unforgiving. Options narrowed faster than consensus could form. External pressure accelerated. Internal warnings conflicted. Time removed flexibility 1 hour at a time. By the time the president acted, delay itself had become a form of surrender. Inside the room, there was no celebration, no sense of resolution, only recognition. Advisors understood that they had crossed a line from which there was no clean return. The presidency would now be defined not just by what it pursued, but by what it had accepted. This mattered because leadership does not exist in isolation. Every choice reshapes expectations. The decision sent a signal, subtle but enduring, about how this White House would respond under extreme constraint. That signal would echo in future negotiations, future crises, future tests of resolve. The president felt the permanence immediately, not as regret, but as gravity. Leadership rarely offers the comfort of certainty. Sometimes, it offers only the knowledge that a moment will follow you long after it passes. This was one of those moments. And from that point forward, the presidency would never again be interpreted without it. The aftermath began quietly, but its presence was constant. Every briefing, every negotiation, every public statement now carried the weight of what had been done. The decision did not fade into background context. It stayed close, shaping how words were heard and how intentions were judged. Advisors noticed it first in subtle ways. Allies asked different questions, no longer assuming the same boundaries. Adversaries recalibrated their expectations, testing in places they once avoided. Even neutral actors adjusted their posture, reading the decision as a signal about where limits truly lay. Inside the White House, the choice became a reference point, not always spoken aloud, but always understood. When new options were proposed, someone would inevitably ask how they aligned with that moment, whether they reinforced it, whether they contradicted it. The past decision had become a lens through which the future was filtered. What made this especially difficult was the absence of immediate consequence. There was no single backlash to confront, no crisis that validated or condemned the choice outright. Instead, its impact accumulated slowly, embedding itself into relationships and perceptions over time. This was the most dangerous kind of legacy, one that unfolds quietly beyond headlines. The president understood this dynamic well. Some decisions punish leaders instantly. Others do something far more enduring. They redefine credibility. They change the baseline against which restraint and resolve are measured. This decision had done exactly that. Advisors debated how much to lean into it. Some believed consistency demanded embracing the signal it sent. Others argued for careful distance, warning that over-identification would narrow future options. The tension was real. The decision could not be undone, but how it was carried forward still mattered. The president listened, weighing not just policy, but identity. This was no longer about what the administration wanted to do next. It was about what the world now expected it to do. Expectations, once set, are difficult to escape. And so the aftermath continued, not as fallout, but as presence. The choice followed them, shaping the presidency not through drama, but through persistence. The question was no longer whether the decision had been made. It was how long its shadow would last. The conflict resurfaced not as opposition, but as inheritance. The president now faced decisions shaped by a past choice that could not be separated from the present. Each new challenge arrived already framed, already constrained by what had been accepted before. Advisors felt it during internal debates. Options that once would have been viable now carried added risk, not because they were flawed, but because they would be interpreted through the lens of that earlier moment. Consistency demanded one path. Adaptation demanded another. Both carried cost. Some advisors warned that leaning too heavily into the legacy of the decision would lock the administration into predictability. Others argued that deviation would signal weakness or indecision. The conflict was no longer about policy. It was about identity, about whether leadership should be defined by continuity or by correction. The president pressed for clarity. Could the administration evolve without appearing to retreat? Could it demonstrate learning without admitting error? The answers were cautious and unsatisfying. Perception had hardened. The choice had created an anchor, and every move now pulled against it. External reactions reinforced the tension. Allies interpreted restraint differently. Adversaries tested limits with new confidence. Each response from the White House was measured not only for what it did, but for what it implied about the original decision. The past was no longer past. It was active. The pressure intensified as another crisis approached, smaller in scale, but similar in structure. Advisors debated whether repeating the pattern would reinforce credibility or compound risk. The president recognized the danger immediately. Leadership trapped by precedent loses freedom faster than leadership guided by principle. This was the emotional peak of the legacy. Not regret, but responsibility. The understanding that one moment had narrowed future choices, and that reclaiming flexibility would require patience, discipline, and visible restraint. Overcorrection would invite instability. Inaction would confirm permanence. Silence filled the room as the president weighed the cost of carrying the decision forward versus slowly redefining its meaning. There was no reset button, no clean break, only a gradual recalibration that might take years to be understood, if ever. The conflict had reached its deepest point. The choice that followed them forever was no longer a single moment in time. It was a force shaping every decision that came after. And leadership now meant deciding how much power that force would be allowed to hold. The resolution came not through reversal, but through restraint. The president chose neither to double down nor to disown the past decision. Instead, its meaning was slowly reshaped through consistent, deliberate action over time. The choice was allowed to stand, but it was no longer allowed to define everything. Inside the White House, this approach demanded patience few leaders ever master. Every response was calibrated to expand flexibility, without drawing attention to the shift. Signals were sent gradually. Boundaries were reinforced quietly. The administration demonstrated that continuity did not mean rigidity, and that learning did not require confession. The effect was subtle, but real. Allies adjusted expectations. Adversaries recalculated risk. The legacy of the decision softened, not erased, but contextualized. It became one chapter in a longer story rather than the story itself. That outcome had never been guaranteed. The president understood what had been achieved. Not redemption, not vindication, but balance. The ability to carry a decision without being trapped by it. This was leadership beyond reaction, beyond image. It was stewardship of consequence. Looking back, the choice that followed them forever did exactly that. It followed, but it did not control. The difference mattered. History often remembers leaders for what they decide in moments of pressure. It rarely remembers how they live with those decisions afterward. This presidency will be defined not only by a single choice, but by the discipline to prevent that choice from becoming destiny. Sometimes leadership is not about escaping the past. It is about proving that the future is still open. Subscribe to join the journey. The